Hey everybody, my name is Nate. You are watching WASD 20. Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the very basics of tabletop role-playing games. This is a presentation that I gave for a class I taught on tabletop role-playing games just 1 year ago, and the class was called So You Want to Slay a Dragon. This was my set of intro slides here, just trying to teach the very basics to some of my students who had never encountered tabletop role-playing games before. So today we're going to be learning just a little bit what they are, and also learning some of the basic terms and vocabulary that people use when talking about tabletop role-playing games to help you gain a little more understanding. So firstly, what is a tabletop role-playing game? Here are a couple of ways we can look at them. You can look at tabletop role-playing games as a collaborative storytelling experience. Maybe you've tried this before, where you sit in a circle with people. I think I might have done this in English class or something in high school, and you sit around and you tell a story. And one person starts, and then the next person picks up, and then the next person tells a little more, and you go around, and pretty soon you've got some kind of crazy story. In some ways, tabletop role-playing games are similar to that. Secondly, tabletop role-playing games are a simulation. You are in a world trying to simulate the experiences of a character in that world. You are playing a role and trying to do so faithfully to that character and to the setting. Thirdly, tabletop role-playing games are cooperative. They are generally not competitive experiences. You are generally cooperating. You're not trying to beat other players. You're trying to tell a good story together and have a fun experience. In fact, one of the opening scenes of the movie E.T. has these young kids sitting around playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons, or something very similar anyway, and the mom asks, "Who's winning?" or something like that, and the kids say, "Mom, that's not how it works." And yeah, they're right. That's not how it works. And fourth, tabletop role-playing games are an opportunity to create, exercise your creativity, to explore, and as all games can be, they can be a form of escape. So we will be covering some more terms to help us understand, but the first very important term is that of the Game Master. The Game Master is something that almost all tabletop role-playing games have in common. They are usually a sort of an impartial referee who is sort of running the show. So they're the referee, they're the arbiter of rules. When there are conflicts over an interpretation of rules, the Game Master has the ultimate say. They are also the lead storyteller in the experience. Now, hopefully everyone at the table is contributing to telling the story, but the Game Master is the lead storyteller, and they're sort of maybe building the world and deciding what's already there in the story, the background, and they are also maybe kind of laying crumbs along the way to help lead players down certain paths, while still giving, hopefully, some form of player agency. The GM is also this facilitator of fun, the spinner of stories, and the weaver of worlds. Other terms you might hear interchangeably, instead of Game Master: Dungeon Master, Storyteller, Flame Tender, maybe Guide, Referee. There are lots of terms depending on which game you are playing. Probably the most popular one is Dungeon Master. That is the one that's used with Dungeons and Dragons. So now let's talk a little about how it generally works in tabletop role-playing games. In most role-playing games, players create or select a character, and they make decisions about what they want that character to do in the game. The player, the individual player, has determination and say over what their character does. The Game Master, on the other hand, does not usually control an individual character that's playing along with this party of characters. Rather, they are controlling all the non-player characters that inhabit the game world to make it feel like more of a real living, breathing place. The Game Master would also probably make key decisions about the game world. What is the history of this world? What sorts of natural disasters will occur? Things like that. As I said before, ideally the GM and the players tell the story together, but the GM does take more of a lead and does have more control over what happens in the game. Conflicts, like combat for example, or other obstacles of some sort, are usually resolved by the roll of dice in tabletop role-playing games. Now, not always. Some people play diceless games. Maybe you just base the decisions on the stats of your character written out on a character sheet, and that determines everything. There are even some tabletop role-playing games that use a Jenga tower to determine what happens in the game. Now we're going to talk about some important terms to help us understand tabletop role-playing games. The first one that I'll often use to abbreviate tabletop role-playing game is RPG, role-playing game. It can also stand for rocket-propelled grenade, but in our context we're talking about a tabletop RPG, or sometimes we use the term pen and paper RPG. Next up we have PC, which is a player character. This is a character that is controlled by a player at the table. In other words, not the game master. Next up we have NPC, non-player character, and these are the characters, usually there are a whole slew of them, that are usually controlled by the game master. And in general there might be multiple NPCs per session, and they kind of weave in and out of the story, appearing in one session and not appearing in the next, just as you encounter real people in your life. A session is one sitting of an RPG. In general, people are going to sit down to play a tabletop role-playing game for 2 to 4 hours. Now, there are people who will sit down for a 12-hour session or even longer, and there are people who might try to just quickly play a 1-hour session, but it's going to be pretty hard to do anything in less than that. A campaign, on the other hand, is the bigger story, the overarching narrative that is usually going to last several sessions, and can often last many years even. There are groups that have had 15 or 20-year campaigns where it's all been telling one story, and sometimes even playing the same characters that whole time. Sometimes you might have like a mini campaign where you're saying, we're just going to have a 5-session mini campaign over the next couple months, but a lot of campaigns are going to last 10, 15, 20 or more sessions. An adventure is a term that sometimes people use. Sometimes they might use the term dungeon crawl, and this is like a story or a quest. It's usually contained within one session, but not always. Another important term that I actually am realizing I left off here is a module. A pre-written adventure is often called a module. And this is basically a pre-written story that is laid out. Here are the enemies that the players will encounter in this room, and here's what happens next in the story, and the players have a choice of this thing or that thing here, but a lot of game masters do make that up themselves. They create their own dungeons, they create their own adventures, their own stories, and even their own game worlds. A one-shot is a single adventure experience. This is predetermined to last only one session. As opposed to a campaign where you have some continuity between different game sessions in the story and in character development, a one-shot is just saying, basically, we're going to sit down for 3 hours here and we're going to play one adventure, and after that we won't play these characters anymore, most likely. A system is the set of rules or methods used in a tabletop role-playing games. Sometimes they're called the mechanics. An example of a rule system would be D&D 5th edition, or Fate, or Pathfinder, or GURPS, or 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons, etc. These are all different game systems that have different rule sets, and you can usually read about these in a book. Maybe it's a PDF or someone created one online, but usually you have a rule book like this that contains the basics for running that system. A published setting is a game world that can be referenced in published works. For example, Dungeons & Dragons has several published settings: Forgotten Realms, Ravenloft, Dark Sun, etc. Pathfinder has the world of Golarion. If you're running a Star Wars role-playing game, you're playing in the Star Wars universe usually. Now, sometimes for a role-playing game, you might use a published setting that hasn't been specifically published for a tabletop role-playing game. For example, I might decide I want to run a tabletop role-playing game in Skyrim, right? That's my setting. I want to run it in Skyrim. So this is an existing work of fiction. It's a video game, or sometimes maybe it's a movie or a TV show or a novel, but it hasn't been specifically published for a tabletop role-playing game, but you can kind of pull it in and you can make it work for that. On the other hand, we also often use a homebrew world, and this is a world of the game master's own creation. They choose the place, the level of technology, they choose the time, the period of history, etc., and they determine all the factors from the ground up that are going to contribute to creating a cohesive, living and breathing world for their players to explore and for the group to play in. So we could have covered more terms, but these are some of the basic terms that you will hear thrown around when people talk about tabletop role-playing games. Now, we're going to do something a little bit crazy here. We're going to try to put them all together into one story, one narrative, all these terms working together to try to help us use them in context now. Alright, so imagine this scenario, if you will. Sarah is inviting her friends over to play a tabletop RPG. She doesn't give her friends much information, just that she wants to play in a typical fantasy setting. While Sarah is a fan of a good one-shot adventure, she's hoping this will be the start of a campaign. As they settle in with some snacks, they begin to talk about what type of game they might like to play. While one of the players really wants to play a new module he's heard about in the published setting of Forgotten Realms, they eventually settle on a campaign in Sarah's own homebrew world. The system they choose is D&D 5th edition. As the players begin to create their characters, or PCs, Sarah gets lots of good ideas from their backstories for NPCs that she can use to populate the game world. So I don't know if I actually fit all the terms in there, but hopefully this video has been helpful for you if you are totally new to tabletop role-playing games. Hopefully you've gotten some understanding of maybe some terms that you've heard thrown around out there and now are a little less confusing to you. If you're wondering where to go from here, I have some resources that I would definitely recommend you check out. First off, my website, wasd20.net, has a beginner's guide to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. If you're wanting to learn how to play D&D and also understand a little bit about the basics of tabletop role-playing games in general, this can give you more information. I have a section on character creation, how to play, a buyer's guide to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and I have some pre-made characters that you can download. Speaking of the how to play D&D, this is probably my most popular video series right now on YouTube, and I think it does a really good job, I might be a little bit biased, of teaching you the basics of how to play this game, and also any tabletop role-playing game. Just teaching you the basics of what does the Dungeon Master do, and it's actually put together in sample sessions, so you can see how it actually works in practice, while also referring to a character sheet to see how certain stats work in the game. Lastly, I do have a series on Dungeons & Dragons frequently asked questions. Things like, how do I set a DC or a target roll? What about maps and miniatures? How are those used in games? How do I fill out digital character sheets? And one big question is, how can this game be fair when it's all up to the subjectivity of one person, the Game Master? So anyway, feel free to check out other videos on my channel too. There's lots of other great stuff out there on the interwebs, but those are some suggested resources that I've created over the past couple years. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this is a set of slides that I used for my class on tabletop role-playing games last year, about a year ago. And there are other slides that I also use to teach the history of Dungeons & Dragons. And so in the coming months, I'll be putting some of those videos out there too, so keep your eyes open for those. Should be a fun journey. All right, that's all for this time, everybody. If you like this one, make sure you give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear from you. Any comments, always great to hear from you down in the comments below. Make sure you're subscribed for more great content. And everybody take care. You'll see me again very soon.